welcome back to Indie Rebel, the podcast for independent filmmakers. My name's Christopher Tempel, and I'm your host for this show. Wanted to just chime in real quick and say this is probably an episode that a lot of you indies have been waiting for. This is going to answer that question: what camera do I need to make a movie? And I feel like these days when you ask that question, you already kind of know the answer anyway. But hey, who cares? This gives me something to talk about for a bit. I can nerd out on cameras, and I'm looking forward to it. So, I do want to clarify that every filmmaker you ask this question to will give you a different answer. There's no right or wrong answer to this question. And so, what follows in the show is simply my opinion and is based on my own personal experiences. Before we jump into that, though, I do want to say that my movie Leap: A Tale of the Last Days is now out on Amazon and Tubi as well. So if you don't want to pay to rent it on Amazon, you can watch it on Tubi for free. Go ahead and check it out. And yeah, so let's jump into this here. I'm going to start off by covering kind of my history with cameras because that explains a lot of where my opinions come from. My first camera was a VHS camcorder, and it was one that my dad had bought from Sears back in 1988 or 1989 to record family life events and vacations and holidays and all the kind of stuff that people used to use, 8mm for back in the day. My dad bought a VHS camcorder to kind of fill that void in the 80s because video was now becoming all the rage. And that camera was given to me when I was about 10 years old. So 1995, my family gave that camera to my brother and I for Christmas one year. And sorry, camcorder. And because my dad had now upgraded to High 8, which was a digital, or not digital, excuse me, but it was a better video format, but it was still analog. And so I used that camcorder, that VHS camera, to shoot a whole bunch of just short films and experimental tests. I did like stunts falling down the stairs and jumping off the playset in the backyard. I did my own like little version of the Muppets. I had a ventriloquist soft puppet thing that I gotten from Disney World that I would, set the camera up on a tripod high, and then I'm laying down below trying to hold it up so all you see is the puppet creature. I shot stop motion stuff with my Legos. I actually shot a 30-minute stop motion movie with Legos on VHS. Had no way to edit or anything like that, but I really just enjoyed shooting my own stuff and getting to watch it again afterwards. You go into your room and you film for a couple hours and you come out and you pop the tape into the VCR and you get to see what you've done. And it started to become very addictive. When I was in high school, I took a video production class, and that's where I was introduced to Mini DV. And Mini DV was the first real consumer format that was digital. Digital 8 had come out before, but it was still using High 8 tapes. This was a format all onto its own. The tapes were super small, smaller than a deck of playing cards, and the quality looked really good too, especially with some decent lighting. And so I shot a ton of short films on this. I shot my graduating senior project, which I made a movie for called Ninja Nerd. I shot probably over 40 shorts on this thing. I shot my first 2 features on Mini DV as well, both with a JVC camcorder and a Canon ZR800 that had a microphone input that I was really excited about. And so this was kind of my life for a couple of years, was this Mini DV. And around this time, the early 2000s, the first HD cameras were starting to come onto the scene, and they were tape-based as well. I'm looking at like the Sony F900 and F950 from Star Wars episodes 2 and 3. And I was really excited to learn that, hey, these are tape-based cameras, and they're shooting digitally. I've got a tape-based camera, and I'm shooting digitally. So in my head, I kind of thought like I was using the same toys that the big boys were using. Of course, high def is quite a bit different than standard def, but I didn't care. I was like, yes, I'm on this bandwagon. We're making it happen. And then I got my first experience with HD, also on tape, by borrowing a Sony FX1. This was, as I affectionately described it, a big, black, and sexy camera. And I borrowed it from a guy that was producing video for a local church literally across the street from my apartment at the time. And so we borrowed it and we shot kind of a proof of concept for my new movie that I was going to get ready to shoot that summer called Leap: Rise of the Beast. And this FX1 did produce an HD image. However, it was interlaced and it did not have 24 frames per second. It was still 30 frames per second. But it still looked a lot better than what I had been shooting previously at standard def, and it could record onto a mini DV tape. And that was really exciting to me too, that I could use the same format I've been using, but get a better image out of it. So I kind of was starting to set my mind on the fact that, hey, maybe I'm going to buy this camera to shoot my next film. And then a friend of mine, Chris Trechter, he decided to drag me off to a camera store one day in downtown Spokane because he wanted to look at this new camera that had come out called a Canon 7D. And he's like, yeah, it's a stills camera, but it shoots video. And of course, I sold cameras at Best Buy before, a couple years before this. And so I knew better. I'm like, yeah, there's no way that a stills camera can shoot good video. I've tried that myself when I worked there. But I went to go look at it anyway, and we were blown away. This is right there at the beginning of the SLR revolution, DSLR revolution. The 5D Mark II had just come out a couple months before, and now the 7D. And so we ran around the store with the 7D. The shop owner let us throw a memory card in there of his, and then I had brought my laptop in case we were able to get anything good, and I actually transferred that footage afterwards to the laptop so I could take it home and look at it and study it and all that kind of stuff. And then he tells us that there is a new camera coming out that has the exact same sensor and shoots the exact same quality as the 7D, but it's half the price. And that camera was the Canon Rebel T2i. So I go home, I do a little research onto this, and I find out that the T2i shoots full HD video, and it had 24 frames per second, just like the 7D. And that sensor, that APS-C sensor, is exactly the same size, or within a millimeter, of motion picture 35 millimeter film. So in my head, I thought, this is truly like the camera to end all cameras. This is exactly what I've been waiting for. So we go to Best Buy, and I bring an SD card with me from home, and I pop it into the camera at Best Buy, and we shoot a bunch of test footage right there in the store. I take it home. Now I've got 7D footage and I've got T2i footage, and my computer didn't know what to do with it. It didn't like the file formats. My editing software didn't want to edit the raw footage that we had shot. And so I had to really study up and come up with a workflow. And this is super important, and we're going to come back to this later. But workflow is probably the most important part of the editorial process. You have to have a pipeline in place to get your footage from the camera to your final viewing, format. So that's actually what I set out to do. I took the sample footage I'd shot from the 7D and the T2i, and I went home, and I really did a lot of research, and I figured out that Hollywood at the time was still using a process called offline editing. And offline editing means that you convert your footage to a lower resolution, and then you edit with that, and then you conform or relink your low-res offline files to your high-quality footage. Now today, a more common term for this is proxy editing. I've never liked the term of it. It sounds a little weird to me, so I call it offline and online. But that's what I came up with. And so I was now convinced after my testing that I had a working pipeline. I absolutely loved the footage I was getting off of this. I mean, the shallow depth of field and the contrast ratios, and like having the sensor that was, huge, like the size of a postage stamp. I mean, this was just amazing to me. And so I went out and I bought my own T2i. Now that I knew that I could make everything with this work. So now I have a camera, and I really don't have any clue how to use it. Because remember, my experience up until this point has been VHS and mini DV, where I'm controlling white balance and, basic exposure, and that's it. I really didn't know how lenses worked. I didn't know how cameras themselves really worked. And so I had to go to school or school myself, I should say, in how photography works. And so I started, reading a lot of articles online. I watched every video I could find on how to shoot good video with these cameras. I found ProLost, which was a website ran by Stu Maschwitz, who wrote the DV Rebels Guide. And at the time, he actually had some forums on that site that had a lot of good information in there as well. And I kind of became an expert in how to shoot great video on these DSLR cameras. By the time we shoot my movie in July of 2010, I've got this all worked out. The movie comes out looking just absolutely phenomenal. We showed it at a local theater from DVD, and it still looked great. And that movie got me a job at a kids show out here in Montana where they were using Sony EX1s and Canon DSLRs. And because I had experience shooting a feature on a DSLR, I became the DSLR wrangler for that show, making sure all the settings were set up properly, all the software was up to date with whatever we needed. By now, I was running something called Magic Lantern, which was like a firmware hack for the camera that gave you extra features. And so I was in charge of all the DSLR cameras on this job. And then that job ended up getting me hooked up with another company that was shooting a documentary series on Red. And this was my first time using Red, but now because I knew how to use a camera, picking up the Red was really no big deal. It was all the same thing. Now, unfortunately, in 2015, I had a house fire that destroyed everything I owned, including all my camera equipment. And I thought about, what camera do I want to get next? And I thought, well, I could buy another T2i. I know the camera, I know how to use it well, but there were some quirks about it that I didn't like. I didn't like the moire, I didn't like the aliasing, and I didn't like the rolling shutter. It was pretty heavy for a camera like that, which is that jello effect. And so I said, maybe there's a better camera out there. So I start doing some more research, and I found out that Blackmagic Design had a new camera called the Ursa Mini 4K. And the Ursa Mini 4K had the global shutter, and it could shoot raw video at 4K resolution. I thought, well, this is great. I grew a lot with my T2i. This camera's gonna let me grow a lot as well, and it fixes some of the gripes I had with my T2i. So I bought that, and I always find I have to explain myself, why did I buy that camera instead of the Ursa Mini 4.6K? Yes, the 4.6K has more dynamic range. I understand that. But to me, dynamic range isn't the be-all, end-all to a cinematic image. At the time, I was doing a lot of action movies, and so I really wanted that global shutter so that my stuff wouldn't have all that nasty jello effect. And so it really has been a great camera, and I even used this same camera it's now 10 years old. At the time, it was 7 or 8 years old. But we used it to shoot my latest feature film, Leap, A Tale of the Last Days, which is now on Amazon and on Tubi, so that's pretty cool. So, as you can tell, I've used a lot of cameras over my career. Everything from VHS to various mini DV cams, and different flavors of mini DV. So like when in high school, we had the Sony VX 2000, which was a very popular mini DV cam. And then I used a JVC, and then I had a Canon. I have had my hands on a Canon XL1 at one point. When I was working at Best Buy, a customer brought it in to have me help troubleshoot it for him. And then moved on to HDV with the Sony FX1. And then I moved into just regular full HD tapeless cameras with the Canon Rebel T2i. And then moved on to the Sony EX1 and Reds as well. And of course, now I'm on Blackmagic. So I've used a lot of stuff, but somehow I've managed to avoid having gas. And for those that don't know, GAS stands for Gear Acquisition Syndrome. And I think there's gas in almost any hobby and sport out there today. Like, you always want the latest and greatest of everything, but it's really common in the film world for whatever reason. I don't know why. Everyone wants the latest and greatest cameras. I'm someone that when I've got a camera and a system and a pipeline in place, I tend to not think about what else is going on out there. And I actually kind of shut down from that and don't do all the research of what's coming down the pipelines and stuff. Which is exactly why my buddy had to drag me to a camera store to show me the 7D, because my mind just wasn't in that headspace of looking for, newer cameras. I was happy with what I had. So, long story short, I've used a lot of cameras. I've used consumer cameras. I've used professional cameras, and I've used cameras that have gotten my work, distributed now on major streaming platforms and stuff like that. So, coming off of that experience, let me tell you kind of some things that you need to look for in a camera. And the very first thing you should consider is your workflow. I don't care about how many Ks it's got. I don't care about the dynamic range. I don't even care about the frame rates, really. Like, I just want to know that I've got a workflow in place. Because if you can't do anything with that footage, it is pointless. And don't be making excuses either, like, oh, it's going to be the editor's job to figure it out. No, because when you're starting out and you're the indie rebel, you are the freaking editor. Okay. It's your job to make it all happen. Therefore, it's your job to have that workflow and a solid pipeline in place. So make sure that you can figure out how to get your footage from the camera to your computer, to your editing software, out of your editing software, and onto whatever platform you're going to distribute on, whether it be YouTube, Blu-ray, DVD, or streaming, or even theatrical for that matter. Just make sure that you've got a solid way to take it all the way down the pipe. Also, when it comes to cameras, another factor that I would consider is make sure that it is at least full HD or 1080p. 4K is nice, and that's kind of all the rage right now. I understand that, and some cameras like or some companies like Blackmagic are even making 6K, 8K, 12K cameras. But the truth of the matter is that as an indie filmmaker, you really don't need anything more than that 1080. Okay, 4K can be nice, but it's not a must. I also truly believe that shooting 1080 will teach you good composition as a cinematographer because you can't crop into it as much in post without losing quality. A lot of filmmakers that get 4K cameras and they shoot everything like really wide. David Fincher's notorious for this and drives me nuts. He shoots it wide knowing he can punch in to get his close-ups after the fact. And so I like to say that, shooting 4K encourages lazy filmmaking because you're not being as deliberate about your shots. Now, it is nice to be able to shoot wide and know that you can punch in close. I actually tried on my new movie. I shot an entire scene wide at 4K. Oh, I shot the whole movie at 4K, but I shot an entire scene wide purposefully to see if it would speed up my shooting so I could just punch in and grab my close-ups and inserts later. And at the end of the day, it really didn't speed things up that much at all. I still found myself wanting to go in and just shoot the close-ups the right way. And part of that is probably because of my upbringing not being able to crop in as much with these cameras. So I would say full HD. 4K is nice, but it's not a game changer or a deal breaker when it comes to choosing a camera. The big thing is making sure that you are deliberate with your framing and your focus and all that kind of stuff. Also, at this point, number 3 would probably be 24p, also called 23.976p. This is your frame rate. That's how many pictures per second your camera is taking in order to make motion pictures. And 24 is the gold standard in Hollywood. That's going to be the start to you getting your film look. We could do another podcast just about film look if you want sometime. Just let me know in the show notes or the comments. There are filmmakers out there that are experimenting with higher frame rates. Peter Jackson comes to mind. But, when he did the Hobbit series at 48, like people literally booed when they saw the 48 projection. And, you're not Peter Jackson. You can't get away with that yet. So I would say don't try to push people into, your methodology because you think it's better. Stick with the 24. The one time where I do think a high frame rate is good and better potentially is when you're doing 3D. I think about the Avatar with James Cameron, or by James Cameron. That needs a higher frame rate in order to look good. And for whatever reason, so when I saw Avatar: Way of Water in theaters with my wife, we watched it in 3D. I told her, you're never going to see a 3D movie like this, again, unless it's another Avatar. Like James Cameron is the man when it comes to 3D filmmaking. But for whatever reason, they had certain scenes that were 24 and certain scenes that were high frame rate. And there was really no rhyme or reason to them. And at the end of the day, in 3D, stereoscopic, the high frame rate did look better. So I would concede to that point that if you were doing 3D video, go for the higher frame rates. If you're just shooting 2D like the rest of us, because it's just going to go to streaming or YouTube, then shoot at 24. Don't even think about it. And then the final thing to consider when you're choosing your camera is manual controls. Okay? This is a must-have if you want to have complete control over your image. And you also need to learn how to use these controls. Learn what ISO is, what an f-stop is, and how to use those in tandem with each other. Learn about shutter speed. When do you or don't you change that? How does that relate to your frame rate? We're going to talk about all this here in just a little bit in this podcast too. But really make sure you've got these manual controls. White balance too is also key, especially if you don't have a camera that shoots RAW. RAW will actually allow you to change a lot of settings in the edit, and that's the beauty of RAW because it's capturing raw censored data. But I do think it's good to be able to pick up any camera that's out there, including ones that don't shoot RAW, and still get a good image out of them. And that's where you want to learn about white balance. And we're going to talk about that here too. So these are the things that we've talked about that you need. Oh, and kind of going along with this, I should say, we'll throw this in, is manual lenses. Manual lenses are super nice to really dialing in the look that you want. And again, it's just about giving you more control. Even an iPhone, an iPhone Pro, like I've got the 16 Pro, it's got 3 lenses on it. It's got an ultra wide, a normal, and a semi telephoto. And having that just gives you more creative options as a filmmaker. Now, things that you don't need in a camera, and this is where I kind of start up a little bit of controversy with people. One, you don't need 4K. We've already talked about that. But with that, you don't need RAW. Even though I've just said how great RAW can be, it's not necessary to produce a good looking film. And I kind of think that RAW is like 4K in that it can encourage lazy filmmaking because you know that you can change things later. Now, I will say, having shot a feature in RAW, it is nice to have, and it allows you to fix those mistakes that do happen on set. But I don't shoot RAW for the sake of shooting RAW just to make sure I can change things later. I shoot RAW because that's the best format and resolution that my camera can do, and I do think it's best to shoot at the best resolution and format that your camera can shoot. Another thing kind of going along with this is log picture styles. You do not need a flat or log picture style. And I'm going to take a lot of heat for this one, I know. But here's the thing. Log is basically a flat picture style, and it does give you more range and control when doing your color grading. However, the thing is that most indie rebels, when they're starting out, will shoot log because everyone says to shoot log, and then they just throw on a LUT to it in the editing, which basically ruins the entire point of shooting log in the first place. It's like, if you don't know why you're doing it, don't do it. Seriously, you're going to get a better image if you learn how to expose properly, if you learn how to set your white balance, and learn to light your scenes and work with lighting and stuff to help create the look that you're going for. Don't rely on your digital color correction. And with that, don't rely on frickin' LUTs. Like, seriously, learn to do the work yourself. It's gonna make you that much better of an independent filmmaker. If you do want to shoot log, then I would say learning how to color grade properly is an absolute must. Now, at the end of the day, okay, calm down, Chris. Get off your soapbox for a minute. At the end of the day, the biggest consideration for what camera you should get is probably going to be your budget. When the pros tell you to use what you have, like, we mean it. Money is far better spent on things like lighting, on lenses, on sound, on actually paying people. If you've got those bases covered and you have some funds left over, then that budget is going to dictate what kind of camera you can or should get. All right? But don't just go out and buy the camera first and say, I'm going to figure out how to work the rest of this out later. I don't think that's a great way to go. And I've been in that camp before. Trust me. That's what I did with that T2i. I spent $800 on this Canon Rebel and then didn't have any money left to shoot the film. So the whole movie kind of suffered because of it. We were using makeshift lighting setups and, had to have my cast and volunteer to act for me. And that just doesn't put a good taste in my mouth. So I would say definitely spend your money on things that go in front of the camera first. Okay, your sound, your lighting, lenses, paying people, all that kind of stuff. And then you can look at buying a new camera if you feel that you absolutely need one. Another common thing I'll see a lot of pro filmmakers tell new filmmakers when they're starting out is to just rent it. You don't need to actually own the camera. Go rent a camera for your project. I disagree with this. And the reason is that when you actually own a camera, you can shoot whenever you want. You can be flexible with your shooting schedule, which is a superpower when you're shooting an indie film, right? You can work around your actors' availabilities. You can work around location availability. And as a bonus, you can test the hell out of this camera to your heart's content and get to learn that camera inside and out. The more that you know the camera and the better you know your camera, the better your final image is going to look when you're out shooting your films. Learn the strengths, learn the weaknesses, learn, hey, what kind of lighting setups work best with this? Do I want high key or low key? What kind of lighting can I shoot in? Can I shoot in ultra low light, or do I need to have more light pumped into the scene? So, also going along with this is realize that whether you buy or rent whatever camera you get, you're getting a system. You're looking at the body, you're looking at lenses, you're looking at batteries, you're looking at cards, you're looking at software that can handle the footage that comes out of these. It all has to work and play together. Don't think that just because you have the funds for a Sony FX3 or the latest Blackmagic Pixies or something like that, that means that you can get that camera because you do have the funds for it. Make sure you can afford your power solutions. Every camera has a different battery. It's just the way it is, and you need to make sure that you can have enough batteries to cover a full 12-hour day of filming. Make sure that you can afford those memory cards, and in a lot of cases, you're going to need a card reader to go with them. My Ursa Mini shoots onto CFast 2.0 cards. At the time when I bought it, I was paying about $250 a piece just for the cards. And then I needed a card reader on top of that to make sure I could transfer the footage from the cards into my computer. So, again, it's a system that you're looking at. Look at the lenses. You know, if you've got a bunch of old Canon lenses laying around, EF mounts, the last thing you want to do is flip over to a Sony mount type camera because all your lenses are suddenly worthless. Yes, you can get adapters and rings for them, but it's kind of a hack around for it, you know? It's not the way that system is designed to work. So, whatever you do, at the end of the day, make sure that if you're renting or buying, that everything is going to work together. And that kind of goes into what I was saying earlier, drilling home, though, the point about having a good pipeline in place. Now, let's go and talk about how to actually get a good image with any camera that you can pick up. And there's a couple things that I go through. I actually teach a class at the community college about shooting and starting a YouTube channel. And when I cover the class on shooting good video, this is what I walk them through. First thing you need to do with any camera you pick up is set the frame rate and set your frame size. Make sure you're shooting at whatever resolution you want to shoot at. Then you set your frame rate. Okay. Again, we've already talked about it. That should be 24 or as close to that as possible. Some cameras are going to call it 23.976. Others will shoot at a true 24. Just make sure you get that frame rate locked in. The next thing you're going to set is your shutter. And your shutter is based upon your frame rate. All right. Again, you got to know the rules before you can break them. So what do I mean by this? Most cameras today are going to display your shutter speed as a fraction of a second. And what you want is you want to get that fraction to as close to double your frame rate as possible. So if I'm shooting at 24 times 2 would be 48, I want to get my shutter to 1/48 or as close to that. On Canon DSLRs, it used to be the case that you had to get it to 1/50. That was the closest you could get to it. And that produces the best motion blur for that frame rate. This screws with a lot of photographers. People that have done photography for a while and they're used to using these pro cameras for photography will oftentimes use their shutter speed to cheat their exposure because it can do that. But you're only dealing with one picture. When you're dealing with 24 pictures a second, you just can't do that anymore because the motion blur is going to change. If you have your shutter speed set wrong because you're using that to help fudge your exposure, you're going to end up with something that maybe looks like Saving Private Ryan. Or it's going to look like this super crazy dream sequence because everything's going to be super smeared and super blurry as it moves around the screen. So keep your shutter based upon the frame rate and you should be good to go. The next thing I tell people to set is their white balance. This is how the camera sees the color white and everything else is mapped around that. It's really easy to set. If you are shooting outside in broad daylight or you're using LED light panels that are balanced as daylight, then you want your white balance set at 5600 or daylight. Okay, that just means that that naturally blue light is going to look natural. If you're shooting indoors in grandma's living room where she's got a lot of incandescent light bulbs and that's what you're having to use to light your scene, you're going to want to be down at like 3400, 3500, somewhere around down in there for your white balance. And that's going to make that orange light look more natural and more pleasing to the eye. Now, there's a caveat with either end of the spectrum here. If I'm indoor balanced for incandescent lights, and that's what my white balance is at, then daylight's gonna look very blue as it comes in through the windows. And if I'm balanced for daylight, and then any incandescent lights are gonna look really, really orange. And so you have to make sure that you're taking that into account as you're planning your shoot. When I did Rise of the Beast, I shot that with halogen work lights, and they were the old school halogens with a very warm color temperature. And so I shot with my white balance way down low for most of that film. These days, I've gotten into shooting everything at daylight balanced because this means I can have an actor stand in front of a window, and as long as I've got enough light on them, I'm not going to have any weird color issues. If I was indoor balanced, shooting against a window, that sky coming in from the outside is going to look blue and it's going to look hideous. Another thing that goes along with this that I tell people is don't mix your color temperatures. And the reasons for that are pretty much everything we've just covered, right? You've got to make sure that you're not screwing up with your colors and such, especially when you're not shooting raw. Now, the exception to this rule is if you know why you should be mixing your color temperatures. If you know why it's good to have an orange light and a daylight balanced light in the same shot, then you can get away with it. A great example that I've encountered personally is like when I'm wanting to shoot a campfire scene at night. So I shot a movie about my time being homeless here in the mountains of Montana, and I decided to have orange light enforcing the campfire, and then I wanted like blue moonlight on everything behind them on the trees and stuff like that. And I had these LED light panels by Neewer. And so I set my white balance kind of in the middle of the two. And that made the campfire light more orange. And it also meant that the daylight that I was bouncing onto the trees turned out blue and ended up looking like moonlight. And I got the shot in camera without having to do any crazy color grading to it in post. So there is an exception to the rule. But in general, when you're starting out, follow the frickin' rules. All right? The next setting that you need to be aware of is your ISO, and this is the sensitivity of your camera. A lot of cameras today have extremely high ISOs. I would test those first and test them in different lighting scenarios before you actually go out and shoot a film at 16,000 just because your camera can. It might be so grainy that it's unusable. I don't know. There's also dual native ISO cameras out there where they have a native sensitivity that's high and a native sensitivity that's low, and you can flip between them depending on what you're trying to do. That said, most Hollywood films and blockbusters from the past, I'm thinking like Raiders of the Lost Ark, let's say, they're shooting with sensitivities really no more than like 400. It might be slightly higher than that, but not by much. And the reason they're able to make the movies look the way they do is the lighting. So generally what I do is I shoot at a ISO of like 120 or 200 when I'm outside in broad daylight. Okay, so I cancel out that sensitivity a little bit. And then if I'm indoors or at night, then on my particular camera, I set it to 400. My camera can go to 800, but it's super grainy and it's unusable. So I set it to 4, and then I bring in lights to actually get the shot and the look that I'm trying to go for. So again, you're going to need to experiment with that, and that's, again, is why I say I recommend that you own your camera and not rent a camera. The final setting that you need to be aware of is your f-stop, or your aperture. And this is literally controlling a bladed iris that's built into your lens. So your lens is going to dictate what kind of apertures you can shoot at. There are fast lenses that can go to 1.8, and then there's average lenses that might only be an f4. My lens that I use right now is a Canon EF 24-105, and it's only an f4. What that means, though, is that if I were to do a manual zoom in a shot, I'm not going to get any flickering. Because a lot of these lenses that can go wider, like even the kit lens that goes to 3.5 at the wide end, that is, when you go telephoto, can only go to 5.4. And so as you zoom in with that, you're going to see this flickering effect as the aperture is clicking down, because that's all it can tolerate at the more telephoto end of the spectrum. So to recap on this here, your ISO is going to be your sensitivity of the sensor. If you're indoors, set it higher. If it's a low light, set it higher. If you're outside broad daylight, set it low. And then your f-stop, or your aperture, is going to be your main exposure control. That's how you're going to make the image brighter or darker. Now, if you want a shallow depth of field, you need to have a very low f-stop. It needs to be fast, okay? Like f4 or lower kind of a thing. What you can do in broad daylight is you can put a filter on your lens called an ND, or neutral density filter. It's like sunglasses for your camera. That darkens it, and now you can open up your f-stop a little bit more so you can get that shallow depth of field if that's the effect that you're trying to go for. So from the top, set your frame rate, set your shutter speed. Okay, that should be a given. And the cool thing about that is once you set those, you never have to mess with them again unless like it accidentally has gotten changed. But generally speaking, you should never have to worry about it once you set them. Then you've got your white balance. Okay, so shoot what kind of color lighting you're using. Then we get into our exposure, making sure that the sensitivity is right, and then the actual exposure is dialed in for where you want it to be. A lot of cameras today have a built-in tool called zebras, and this will colorize with black and white stripes anything that's overexposed in your shot above a certain threshold that you can manually set. And that is extremely helpful because a lot of these cameras, it's just an LCD screen that you're looking at. And so having on-screen displays for, hey, that this is overexposed, or in the case of focus peaking, this is not sharp, that can really help you when you're filming in broad daylight. You can just learn to start shooting by the numbers and trusting your numbers. I remember learning that on a short film shoot that my buddy and I did in Washington, where we were filming with my Ursa in broad daylight, and I just could not see the screen. I didn't have a jacket or anything with me to cover the screen and my head so I could see it really well. And I had to just trust the numbers. Exactly what I just said. Okay, we're shooting outdoors, ISO 200. F-stop. All right, well, let's dial in our exposure until the zebras go away. And then for focus, again, same thing. I had focus peaking turned on. Yep, everything lit up blue. Okay, everything's sharpened in focus. And I trusted it, and it worked. So learn to trust your numbers. And again, play with it, play with it, play with it. Practice, practice, practice. It's literally the best thing that you can do. I want to take a quick moment and talk about filming on phones because this is something that is becoming more and more common today, especially for YouTubers. And it is now even taking place in the film industry with movies like 28 Years Later being shot on iPhone 15s. If you don't have money for a camera, but you've got an iPhone or you've got like a flagship, Samsung or something like that, shoot with your phone. It's okay. The important thing is that you're learning to tell a story visually. Phones are great learning cameras. And I think to this day, if I had my iPhone 16 Pro back when I was getting started, I don't know how long it would have taken me to actually upgrade to a actual camera because the phones are just getting that good now. It's really, really crazy what you can do with them and the kinds of images that you can produce. They're also super small and versatile. You can stick them into tight spots and tight corners. There's apps on them that can emulate certain things. I shot a movie set in the 90s about a lake monster once, and I wanted the main character to have a VHS camcorder that he's using to film what's going on. And then I had a VHS app on my phone that we would cut to show the point of view of that camcorder. And that was really, really handy because now I have that VHS look baked into it. It wasn't a filter that I applied on top. It literally manipulated the footage from the start to look like it was shot on VHS, complete with the overlays and the static and the right grain structures and all that kind of stuff. The tracking issues, all the things that make VHS great. So you can use the phones. Now, if you're going to use your phone, I recommend getting a third-party app for it. Filmic Pro was the most popular one for years, and they've kind of fallen by the wayside because they decided to go subscription-based instead of a one-time purchase. And then Blackmagic released an app for iPhones and now certain Androids as well. You'd have to look and see what Androids they can be used with. But it basically turns your phone into a Blackmagic cinema camera. All the controls are the same. It's laid out the same as it is on your camera viewfinder. And I really, really like Blackmagic camera. Also for iPhone, there's another one called Final Cut Camera. I like that one a lot as well. Very easy to use, but still giving you all the manual controls. What I don't recommend is just shooting with your built-in native camera app, the one that you can access from the lock screen. That app is got a lot of stuff going on in the background and making decisions for you. and basically not giving you control. Now, if it's your first film and you've never shot anything before, not even a short, then yeah, do a couple shorts and use that native app to get started and focus on the important things like framing, how to direct what's going on in front of the camera. But when you're ready to take control of your image, you really want to get a third-party app like Blackmagic or Final Cut in order to do that. Now, I know this has been going on for a while. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here to talk about. Let's talk about real quick some camera equipment. These are things that you need in order to make your cameras perform the best way that they can. First up, a tripod. Get yourself a tripod that's weight rated for the weight of your camera. And these are super, super versatile. Like, if you lock off your camera, put it on a tripod, and just leave it there, most people are not going to be able to tell the difference between that and a shot from a Hollywood film. Get creative when you do that. Do some low angles, do some high angles, but just learn to shoot on a tripod first. It takes all the micro jitters and the movements and stuff out of it, and it just makes it look really nice. You can also, depending on the tripod that you have and the weight of your camera, you can turn this into, like, I called it the steady pod. You can make it into a shoulder rig. I did all this on Rise of the Beast. If you go to YouTube and search for the making of Leap, Rise of the Beast, you'll find a 2-hour documentary that I produced showing all the different versions of using a tripod to create other pieces of camera equipment. At one point, I'm strapping on rollerblades, and I put the camera into steady pod mode where I extend the legs, I tilt the camera up so you can look straight ahead with it, and I hold it by 2 legs, and I chase my actors around on rollerblades this way. And what I've done by using the tripod like that is I've turned a really small SLR camera into a much larger camera, because a larger camera moves different than a smaller camera. And so I wanted to make sure that I could capture that. You'll also see how I collapse the legs in, do some origami with the head and the camera, and now I've got a shoulder rig using that exact same tripod. And when I was shooting with a small lightweight camera like that, having a shoulder rig really helped add a lot of physical weight to especially the action scenes. It felt like we were shooting with a camera that was much larger than we actually were. With that, I'd say you can look at a stabilizer. Okay, these are very useful for moving shots. I personally prefer mechanical ones like a Steadicam or a Glidecam, but gimbals do work, and you can use electronic gimbals as well, especially if you're shooting on an SLR. But to me, there's nothing better than a mechanical stabilizer. Like, they look so good. The exception for that to me would be if I'm shooting with my iPhone. Then I have, it's called the DJI Osmo Mobile 6, and it's a stabilizer built specifically for smartphones, and that works out pretty well. Another thing that you should look at getting for random camera equipment is some sort of lens hood or matte box. This is going to prevent light from flaring off your lens and creating unwanted lens flares. We always want to add lens flares when we want to add them, but if you don't want them, you want to make sure that you don't have them. And a matte box or lens hood will help with that. You can even get like cheap rubber screw-on ones for just $1 or $2 off of eBay if you look around. And then the final piece of camera equipment that I always recommend is a black blanket. And this kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier, where I talked about how I had to learn to trust the numbers on my camera. A black blanket will allow you to cover up the screen and your head, so even in broad daylight, you can see everything right there on your screen and know exactly what you're getting. And you can get a black blanket at Walmart for sometimes as low as $5 when they're on sale. Right now, during back to school, is a great time to do that. So I would definitely go hit them up and see what you can find. Now, to wrap up this talk about cameras here, I do want to really quickly talk about specialty cameras. And these are cameras that you're not going to use all the time necessarily, but they are so nice to have and definitely have their place in any cameraman's kit if you can afford to have them. The first would be a drone, because these can be used as helicopters, and you can also use them as mechanical cranes. So if you want to do like a techno crane style shot where the camera starts low and goes high and maybe expands out in the process, you can do that. You just have to constrain yourself when you're the pilot to only go as high as that crane would actually be able to go. What you don't want to do is start at ground level and just send it up and up and up and up and up and up and up, because people are instantly going to know you shot that on a drone, and it's going to cheapen your shot. Instead, if you can constrain yourself to what a mechanical device could actually do, that constraint is actually going to increase the production value of your film. When it comes to drones, I have the Mavic 2 Zoom. I love having the zoom lens because it adds an extra layer of cinematicness to the image because I can create parallax. I can have the foreground move faster than the background. Okay, another thing you can do with drones is you can add a little bit of camera shake to them. I've got a camera shake that I designed myself that emulates it being on a helicopter because a helicopter is going to have a lot of micro vibrations and such that gets transferred into the image. And so I've got a preset that I built that does that. And so I would encourage you to experiment with that, and that's going to also help add production value. Now, I do have to say, if you're flying with a drone, first know that I'm not a lawyer and I don't pretend to be one. This is just my advice from my experiences. I would highly, highly, highly suggest that you get your certification, your Part 107, especially if you're flying in a city. And if you're in a more rural scenario like where I live, at least follow the FAA rules. Don't be a freaking idiot. Don't be stupid, okay? Read up on at least what's required by the FAA for drone pilots. If it says that the drone has to be line of sight, make sure you're flying line of sight. Make sure you're not going above 400 feet AGL. Make sure that you're not flying over crowds of people that are not part of your production. All right? When people do stupid stuff, that's how they get in trouble, and that's how more restrictions get, enforced onto the rest of us. So be smart about it. Follow the rules as if you're certified, even if you're not. Another camera that I think is good for every filmmaker's tool bag is some sort of action camera like a GoPro. You can mount these to a car. You can get your underwater shots. I've held one up on a monopod before to fake a security cam because it's already got that kind of a wide angle lens built into it. And then I just overlaid security, like a security footage interface, like with date and time and stuff like that on the top of it. So you can get really creative with your action cameras. I actually used on my monster movie, Fins, I used my Ursa Mini, my iPhone, and a GoPro in that film. And the film's only like 3 minutes long. But I used the GoPro to get some underwater shots coming up at the canoe, kind of getting a monster point of view and stuff like that. So GoPros are great. And we are now hitting about 47 minutes, so I think it's time to wrap this up. There was a lot of rabbit holes, so we can kind of like chase down and go down with this kind of stuff. Camera tech is always changing. And lower budget cameras are constantly being adopted by Hollywood in many cases, like with 28 Years Later or The Creator that came out a couple years ago by Gareth Edwards. But the most important thing, really, when you're trying to decide what camera should I get, what's the best camera for me, is to look at your existing pipeline. Now, if you are starting completely from scratch, I would say choose the camera that's got the most image characteristics that you like, and then you're going to need to make sure that you can get a computer that can handle it. In my case, I built my computer from scratch, tailored to my camera. When I bought my camera, I had an HP Z800, and it worked okay. I had some workflows in place that allowed me to use that footage, but when I built my custom PC, that changed everything for me. So again, it's not just about the camera. Remember that you're also talking about memory cards and batteries and lenses and computers and software and all that kind of stuff. Because at the end of the day, the footage is useless if you can't do anything with it. All right, we're going to wrap up with some posts from Reddit. I've gotten into Reddit recently. I don't know why. It's a total waste of time. All the questions are the same, especially in the filmmaking subs, and it drives me insane. And so this is my way of just kind of ranting a little bit here. So we're going to answer a couple questions. Question 1. I'm going to leave the usernames out of this. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but good grief, people. How do I keep pushing forward with my short film despite constant setbacks? So this guy has got, he's working on some short films and it's been a struggle. His shoots are months apart because it takes so long to get scenes done. And right now he's thinking he's only going to be able to shoot like one short film a year. And he can only find friends for actors. Nothing wrong with that. I've done that before. Here's the thing. If you're getting constant setbacks, that's all part of this. That is the job. You are problem solving and trying to figure shit out every step of the way. Filmmaking is not this glamorous, oh, I'm going to show up and everything's going to fall into place for me. I get to choose where the camera goes and direct and do this. The job as an indie rebel is just pure problem solving, plain and simple. So If you're getting constant setbacks, I would say keep doing it because it means you're kind of doing something right. This person says, my short film failed. What do I do now? So I made a short film. I was very proud of it and did something completely different from what I usually do. It's better made than anything I've done before, and it was the first time with the skills that I have that I had full creative control. I was happy with it. I submitted it to festivals, hoping with an ego that made my head feel far too big that I'd get accepted. But I didn't want to win any awards, but I did want it to be shown. So apparently this guy didn't get his film accepted into any film festivals. I don't think that makes it a failure. It just means your film wasn't right for those festivals. Like, too many people try to treat short films like it's the be all end all. Like, oh, I have to make a good short. I have to get a festival. That's how I'm going to get connections, and that's how I'm going to make my feature. I don't see it that way, honestly. Like, make a short film to learn. Short films should be your film school. And I've got another podcast coming down the pipe where we're going to talk about that and some films you can make to learn filmmaking so you're prepared to make your first feature. But I don't see this as a failure. Shoot a short, show it to people, get some feedback, stick the stupid thing up on YouTube. You know, if you're lucky and you get enough subscribers to be able to monetize it, so that's cool. But at the very least, you're going to get a lot of feedback from people. They're going to tell you what they like and what they didn't like. And that is valuable information. So don't look at it as a failure. And then finally, I love this one. For those who fail to become filmmakers, what do you do? I'm an aspiring filmmaker, and of course I want to make it big in Hollywood and make well-known movies. But I'm also not naive to the fact that that chance is 1 in 1,000. So to those that failed to become a filmmaker, I just want to see what would happen if I fail. How can you be artistically and creatively satisfied without becoming a filmmaker? Here's the thing, you've got to change your definition. A filmmaker makes movies. They make films. As much as I hate to admit it, you know, if you're just making wedding films, you can still technically call yourself a filmmaker. I disagree with that. I think a filmmaker needs to be somebody that's doing a documentary or doing narratives. I don't consider shooting live events and making something cinematic out of them making movies, but that's just me personally. However, this guy's version or definition of filmmaker is making it in Hollywood. That is totally the wrong mindset to have. If you're making a movie, you are a filmmaker. So instead, what you need to do is redefine your question. For those who fail to find success in Hollywood, what do you do? I haven't found success in Hollywood, and yet I've made 5 feature-length films. I've made a whole bunch of shorts, too. And my latest feature is now on Amazon and Tubi, and I'm able to make money off of it. And my hope, my goal for myself, is to take that money and make a better movie tailored for the streaming markets, and then start making enough money doing that I can both fund future projects as well as make a living off of it. So then I wouldn't even have to do video production anymore, because right now video production kind of cramps your style of making movies. But that is also something you could do too. Start a production company like I did. Quit your day job, start a production company. Now you're spending all your time invested with all the equipment and the technical aspects of things. And then in between projects, you start working on your passion projects. If you don't want to quit your day job, then the best thing you can do is start shooting on nights and weekends. You know, it's simple. There is no excuse for not being able to make films, shorts, or features in this current day and age that we live in. And we can talk more about that in future podcasts, but I think I've talked your ears off long enough. So thank you so much for listening. Let me know if you've got any questions down below. I hope you've enjoyed this episode about choosing a camera and the things to look for when you're doing that. My name is Christopher Tempel, and you've been listening to Indie Rebel, the podcast for independent filmmakers.